get on board the Bernier bus train. Come get on board the Bernier bus train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Oh, get on board the Bernier bus train.
Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernie or Bust Show. And happy Thanksgiving. Keep your little hands. Stop denying global warming. Today's episode is about being woke when woke is still half asleep. This is a Peace Justice article. I'm not sure who wrote it. And it's about how Democratic voters are being funneled into controlled opposition without knowing it. One of the sole positive effects of Trump's 2016 election is awakening. Awakening increased social and political consciousness in the U.S. public. This phenomenon has been shorthanded as woke, yet this wokeness is too often congealed into superficial critiques, a resist hashtag, and concern with tokenism rather than real structural change. This tends to think our problems sprang from Trump-like Athena from the head of Zeus, rather than Trump being a metastasized result of 40-plus years of human-crushing neoliberal policy under both Republicans and Democrats. For those newly emerging into wakefulness, this ahistorical perspective is understandable. The nasty rhetoric and in-your-face casual cruelty are the first and most obvious signs, but it focuses on the symptoms rather than the deeper root causes. The Democratic establishment mixes social critique with around-the-edges reform, incrementalism, to mitigate the most obvious abuses to prevent a head-on challenge to the fundamental premise of the system. That's a very good quote. That's where the lesser evilism rears its ugly head. We've talked about controlled opposition a lot on this show. And so I think you already know what it is. If not, go back and watch dozens of the other shows I've talked about how the Democratic Party has become controlled opposition. This focus on social outrage actually works in favor of the transnational corporatocracy and oligarchs by funneling activist impulses fueled by justified anger away from deep structural inequalities in the system and into social wedge issues. Interestingly, there's a mirror on the right, red-pilled. This term uses the same metaphor, taking a cue from the film The Matrix, wherein a red pill awakens one from the stimulation. Like the woke left, outrage is similarly channeled. To be clear, as a progressive, I firmly believe racism, sexism, and homophobia are real, important, and valid social issues that need addressing. Chris Hedges says the same thing. We just featured him a day or two ago where he said the same thing. But he said that they're distracting us from the real issues. And so not to say that they're not real issues, but they are solvable by not focusing directly upon them, by focusing on the big picture instead. That's from Chris Hedges. I also believe the misdirection pedaled to the right is more damaging because of the way attention is focused off inequities. The way it is focused off inequities is through scapegoating the powerless, i.e. don't blame the billionaire that offshored your job, blame the Mexican dishwasher. However, hashtag resistance often misses that addressing issues of economic justice and war and peace on a deep systemic level will have a vastly greater effect on social justice problems than putting an intersectionally friendly face on the neoliberal machine. As a minority, I would love a person of color as president. I would love a woman president. However, that's the icing, not the cake. If you eat nothing but icing, you'll get sick. I'm throwing neoliberal around a lot, so let's quickly define it. An ideology framing societal relationships as transactions and citizens as consumers that defines freedom in terms of buying and selling, the freedom of trade and capital. It favors deregulation of markets and corporations on the premise that perpetual national economic growth and corporate profit growth are key to social well-being and stability. It's a perfect recipe for destroying a planet. Often, economic domination of other countries to open markets and resources, a form of mercantilism, is required. And then he or she links us to two great primers on neoliberalism that I've already checked out for you. They're very good, both of these links. And so when I link to this article, you'll be able to find these. Since the late 70s, early 80s, neoliberalism has been dominant in U.S. and key Western national policy. They're talking about the Thatcher-Reagan era that I talked about yesterday. Republicans and Democrats from Reagan, there we go, yep, from Reagan and Thatcher in the UK onward have been in its thrall. Bill Clinton's third way triangulation was a combination of being somewhat more socially liberal versus Republicans, married to a neoliberal economic and foreign policy. Bush Sr., W., and Obama also presided over neoliberal policy administrations. This is the key reason I wanted to read this to you. The system isn't broken, it's fixed. Part of Trump's appeal was that he campaigned against a neoliberal system that many ordinary citizens knew had not served them well, especially in swing states. That's where Trump's message resonated very powerfully. Unfortunately, Trump is a demagogue and fused this critique with xenophobic scapegoating, an approach that misdirects populist anger toward vulnerable targets rather than transnationals or oligarchs, thus preserving the system. Also, he predictably didn't follow through with his transparently fake populism. The DNC channels its constituents' dissent into social issues and away from a deep, critical look at economic justice for the same reason. It serves as a release valve for societal pressure built up among a disenfranchised citizenry crushed by the system to one degree or another, i.e. the 99%. After all, gay people, black people, and women also buy iPhones, cars, and toothpaste. This form of hashtag resistance doesn't pose a fundamental challenge to the establishment order. Democrats mix social critique with around the edges, incrementalist, I'm putting in, reform, to mitigate the most obvious abuses to prevent a head-on challenge to the fundamental premise of the system. This has often been called the tranquilizing drug of gradualism, or the way I like to put it is the pot of boiling frogs. It's this against which true progressives, not corporatists in progressive masks like Elizabeth Warren, are fighting. The issues of social, and I put in Elizabeth Warren, that wasn't in the article. The issues of social liberalism are very valid and worth addressing. The irony is that focusing on inclusion via symbolic and tokenist representation has much less impact than would fundamentally challenge and reform the system. I'm going to remember tokenism. That's a good word. Addressing the real issue. Desperate people worrying about their future are more susceptible to xenophobia, racism, and anti-immigrant fervor, allowing them to dehumanize the, quote, other. On the other hand, true economic justice that lowers income inequality has a disproportionate positive effect on poor and disenfranchised communities. Ending the prison industrial complex changes the incentive structure to criminalize those without societal advantages. Curbing a foreign policy that is rested on the back of the petrodollar and oil markets means less wasteful regime change wars. Moving away from neoliberal global economic policy would also mitigate economic imperialism through the debt slavery we've imposed on the global south, aka developing countries. That's interesting because I've read that the northern countries that are socialistic still profit on the backs of the global south. And this profit at their expense has crippled their ability to invest in their own societies and ends up with economic and political turmoil that sends refugees to the industrialized nations. That's what's been going on. This is the great trick of the elites. Create a system with a single set of interests and two faces on social issues. Focus the energy on that while they continue to concentrate wealth and power to an ever smaller group at the top. do so with a complicit corporate media complex. That's what they do. That's their recipe for imperialism. Manufacture consent from even liberals to support endless war for a dream of Pax Americana. And in the meantime, rail against a clown who mean tweets and is an obvious racist and pretends that if we just got rid of him, we could all go back to a peaceful sleep knowing everything will be like it has been for the past 4 decades. And more, really, more than 4 decades. Oh, Ian Teput from Incite Progress. So Ian, excellent article. And if you're sharing this article, please mention the Burning Your Bus television show, because we all need to stick together. We need to get this word out. That talked about the complicity. Ian talked about the complicity of the corporate media. And that's why the Burning Your Bus television show exists. I hope you have lots of good turkey today, and I hope to see you soon. Keep on burning.
Get on board the Burning Your Bus train. Come get on board the Burning Your Bus train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back.